Hello, everyone. A very good morning to you all. My name is Urvashi Aneja. I'm the founding director of Digital Futures Lab. We're a research collective that studies the social impact of technology transitions in the majority world. Delighted to be here and delighted to be chairing this panel. I have an obvious bias because this is a sector I work on, but I do think this is one of the most exciting discussions at the T20, also because it has wide-ranging implications for deliberations in other tracks, whether it's around development and the digital economy or around climate change. So I think it's fairly clear, or it's fairly well established, that technology is going to play a central role in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think we can all also agree that the current model seems to be broken. Our digital economies are dominated by a handful of actors from a select few industrialized economies. We see a growing range of digital harms with limited political accountability. We also see market concentration. And we also see what some would call kind of sectoral transgressions, where the few actors are dominating a wide range of sectors, whether it's payments or agriculture or healthcare. So we do need to rethink how we use and leverage technology for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, for achieving development. And I think this is an urgent priority, particularly in less industrialized economies and the majority world. India has been developing a fairly innovative and new approach to how it approaches this space in the form of developing digital public infrastructure, the state developing digital public infrastructure that can then be leveraged by private sector to build new innovative solutions and to create a more competitive and even playing field for those interventions. But it's still very, very early days with regard to digital public infrastructure. I think we're still trying to figure out what we mean by digital public infrastructure, even how we define it. I think the link between digital public infrastructure and development is yet to be established, exactly what those pathways are. And those pathways may play out very differently in different contexts with different institutional capacities, different development trajectories, and so on and so forth. There's also that we should not assume that just the creation of digital public infrastructure will in itself address market competition or in itself help promote human rights and put privacy at the forefront of the use of technology for development. So there's a lot of work to be done with regard to the governance of this digital public infrastructure and to make sure that it aligns with societal goals and to make sure that and because it's early days, to avoid harmful technology and societal policy lock-ins. So I'm delighted to have an amazing bunch of speakers to help us think through some of these questions. Starting from the left, we have Ms. Kalpana Shastri, who is the managing director at AgHub, my apologies. To her right, we have Pencho Kuzev, who's a policy advisor for CAS in Germany. After that, we have Sharad, the co-founder of iSPIRIT, Shambhavi Naik, the head of research at Takshashila Institution, India, and Ramiro Albrieu, I'm pronouncing your last name wrong, apologies, associate professor of Macroeconomics and Finance, and a senior researcher at the University of Buenos Aires. So thank you all for being here. Kalpana, if I may start with you, I know you have a flight to catch, so we'll excuse you soon. So maybe the first question goes to you. How can we find a common ground between sustainable development and digital futures to ensure alignment on key policy issues?
Yeah, it's a very, thanks a lot. And a very complex question, so I have a complex answer also to it. But before I really start, I would like to put on record my sincere thanks to the Secretariat for inviting me. It's a great thing. It was great to talk to Samir one day, a pleasant surprise, and then getting connected. And thanks a lot to Dr. Sachin also, with whom I have worked earlier also. I'm a core agricultural scientist working currently in an incubator which looks at digital agriculture as the new age technology. And perhaps I think everybody would agree that we are nearing lunch, and food is something we start the day and we end the day with. So And this is one sector which has always been challenged, continues to be challenged, and the stakeholders are always impacted by anything which happens, be it green revolution or the biotech revolution or even the gene revolution. So when we are talking about a new age revolution like digi tools, we will be confronted with a lot of challenges to deploy it. Having said that, I'm not going to say a no for this technology. I think it's essential that it is sort of made into a deployable tool, and digital agriculture in the next century is going to be the transformative tool in many of the sectors, including agriculture. And some of the problems and challenges which are already being faced, like inefficiencies in markets, access to the inputs, growing natural calamities which impact productivity, all these are there. These are innate problems. But what are we looking through this tool? I'm looking at 5 Ps. I look at precision, I look at predictability, I look at higher productivity, and I look at profitability, which will ensure prosperity to the stakeholders. These are the 5 Ps, I would say. And having said that, let me tell you, things are already moving in this sector. We have several startups, beautiful ideas from the youth coming up with lot, and of course, industry, even digi-based industry, which are having a lot of interest to come into this sector. If that be, it should have been a rosy journey. But the deployment is facing a lot of challenge. And this is what I would like to bring to this stream. I think T20 is, Think 20 is the perfect platform to understand the constraints, the challenges this sector would face when these tools are deployed. Fact is, it is there. But how do we take it? So we need a framework which is looking at hyper-local, local, regional, national, and the global. I am deliberately putting in this hierarchy because I think the challenges, the cultural and attitudinal challenges which the stakeholders in this sector face would definitely have to be looked from that order, that is the hyperlocal. Recently, just 2 minutes, I was in a tribal village in the high ranges of Andhra Pradesh, a community-led intervention, doing a lot of work. The young marginalized community youth are trained in digital tools, perfect setting for deployment. But the challenge was, after some time in the community settlements, there is a lack of connectivity. It's not infrastructure. The infrastructure is based, but the natural topography doesn't allow access of some of the tools to be brought in. So if I were to say you use your digital technology and start looking at answers in the value chain, there might be a challenge. Now, that doesn't mean I don't deploy. I start thinking of new frameworks which can work there and then try and take those lessons. And in this, I would say definitely like all other sectors, at least from my knowledge and the research, a lot of work is going on in the Indian system. All the players are interested. Several projects, several schemes are now in. In fact, the PDA scheme itself is an answer what I'm trying to say. And I think we need to take a lesson. It's an open invitation through this forum. Can we think of a sustainable framework for the correct deployment of this new technology and bring those 5 Ps which I voiced first? Thank you.
Thank you, Kalpana. And thank you for reiterating the importance of thinking through frameworks at this early stage. Sharad, maybe I can come to you next. You've been at the kind of forefront of India's experiments with digital public infrastructure. How do you feel the creation of digital public infrastructure can advance the SDGs? And maybe picking up on where Kalpana left off, how can we create a space for these hyper-local solutions so our solutions are contextually appropriate?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say public infrastructure is exceedingly important. We are in a way in the third generation of that public infrastructure. Back in time, public infrastructure meant ports, roads, and airports and stuff like that. And the innovation was, could you have private provisioning of this infrastructure and still regulate it very well? And the issues were, would there be monopolization? Would you be able to handle agency effects? And I think, many countries learned how to do that well, including India. The second generation of public infrastructure that came and became very significant is mobile technology, 25 years ago. Today, you cannot govern in a society without mobile phones. And that is important infrastructure. It is usually privately provisioned. And it brought with it a new class of a problem that we are engaged with now, which is that those providers can now weaponize that technology. And we've seen that happen in a very big way with 5G, and we don't need to go through the details of what has happened. Now we are in the era of the third generation of public infrastructure, which is digital. And it brings with it two kinds of problems that we have not encountered before. First, the old problem has resurfaced, which is monopolization. But in addition to that, we have this issue of monopolization and state, which is leading to authoritarianism, which leading to, you and I have been in meetings with heads of state, of a European head of state, where for 3 hours he talked about how the democracy, the Western democracy, is at threat, right? So there is a new problem that is coming in, which is authoritarianism. And the second new problem that is coming in a big way that we have is colonization. So digital colonization is now a reality, right? And so what do we do with all of this? We have to therefore invent new ways of thinking about this class of public infrastructure. Now, what has happened in India is significant. Why is it significant? Is because it has given us 3 insights, and I'll quickly place all the 3 insights in front of you, because those insights, I think, have global ramifications. The first insight is that we must crystallize what is that digital infrastructure. And the simplest definition of that is that it mediates the flow of people, the flow of money, and flow of information in society. Now, those of you who are here in India, you can easily relate to this. Flow of people is mediated through an identity, a digital identity system like Aadhaar. A flow of money is mediated through a payment system like UPI. And some of you may be familiar with that India has a very modern, robust system that has come to life for flow of personal information. It has been successfully deployed for financial information. It's called the account aggregator. But the goal is that it will be multi-sectoral in nature based on a protocol called Digital Empowerment and Protection Architecture. Niti Aayog has been one of the sponsors of that, and the new bill that is likely to be presented in the parliament is in alignment with that. So if you think of it, there is foundational infrastructure on which agriculture, on which many other things. In India, we call this foundational infrastructure India Stack, and you know of that. So first is this insight as to what is foundational and what will build on it. Because if you don't get the foundations right and you succumb to one of those 3 ills, monopolization, authoritarianism, and colonization in the foundational infrastructure, nothing much is going to happen after that, right? So first is know where the foundation is. The second part is that if you want to get this foundational infrastructure right, it has to be a partnership. It has to be a jugalbandi. A jugalbandi is this Indian partnership like you have in jazz, it has to be a partnership between public technology and public policy. Because the only way to regulate digital infrastructure effectively is through something called techno-legal regulation. Think of it as a potter's wheel, where you have to put both your hands to make some good item, make a pot on the potter's wheel. With one hand, you can't do it. In the past, you could do it only with policy. Now you need public technology and public policy acting together to be able to regulate public infrastructure of the digital kind. And the third big insight that has come is that public technology must follow some principles. And there are 2 principles that have become evident to us in India. and they are not new to India, but although one of them has been practiced at a scale never seen before. One is that it must have open APIs, open protocols. This is not new to us. Internet is founded on this principle. But the West fell into a trap thinking open protocols give you open networks, give you open ecosystems. And that happened because, AOL and Yahoo, the Yahoo won, and they said open networks is an emergent phenomena of open protocols. We learned in 2015, 2014, because of free basics, a Western attempt to compromise our net neutrality, that this is not the case. And therefore, there are experiments taking place in India to build open systems of a kind that have never been built before. It is for credit, open credit enablement network. It is for health, open health services network. It is for commerce, open network for digital commerce. So this open network has a significance. We may not have time to go through it today, but that is important. So we have three major insights that have emerged, which have consequences for the rest of the world. And
Sharad,
what we are learning, and I'll finish with this, what we are learning is that if we are able to incorporate these, then we can deal with these new ills that are associated with digital infrastructure. And if there's time, I'll come back to more points later. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sharad. I think, Sharad, you and I have had many times a back and forth about what openness should be a feature of. And I think we need to be cautious that openness is not something that we only think of in terms of technical standards, but is also a feature of our governance systems for digital public infrastructure. Shambhavi, maybe I can bring you in here on this point. How do you see the link between digital public infrastructure and the SDGs? And if you could perhaps share some thoughts on how these infrastructures should be governed so as to promote public interest.
Right, thank you, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me. I actually want to do the flip side of what Sharad just talked about and go through this, the public policy angle. I'm a policy analyst. So yes, digital public infrastructure is going to be key because obviously it bridges gaps, it improves access. But the most exciting thing for me is that when you're thinking about building public infrastructure, there has to be clarity of thought of the outcome. So we are now reframing SDGs to what is actionable, what outcome can be achieved, and then we are going to try and build a public digital infrastructure on it. So that simplified government action by itself, I think, can help us achieve quite a lot more. What I do think will happen is there are two forms of government actions, right? There's service delivery itself. So if you look at vaccinations, we had COVID and we delivered vaccines through it. We could track end to end, which was great. But we can also use digital infrastructure then to engage on topics like vaccine hesitancy, disinformation about vaccines, etc. So there are various avenues in which digital public infrastructure can play a role in achieving SDGs. I do want to add a policy principle to Sharad's technical principles that I think are going to be key. One is that the obviously implementation has to be equitable. That public welfare has to be at the core of the thinking of digital public infrastructure. So just as we are thinking of open sources, we are thinking privacy by design, we are thinking equity by design, etc. Public welfare has to be the core. Implementation has to be equitable, and there has to be some sort of purpose limitation, because otherwise, if you think of SDGs, they are so broad, you can actually encompass everything in it, which means digital infrastructure can actually go beyond its remit very, very easily. And that's, I also think, where the authoritarianism argument can creep in. So purpose limitation is going to be key. I think built on these principles, the SDGs might, so public digital infrastructure might actually be able to tackle SDGs. We do the minimum incremental things, trial, error, and then go back and see if something else is required. I think a key for success is going to be digital literacy. So if there are not enough programs for digital literacy, we will not have an equitable system for digital public digital infrastructure's adoption. So I think the key to all of this is to be trust in the system. And I think built on these principles, there can be trust, and there hopefully will be adoption for this.
Thank you. Thanks, Shambhavi. I'm so glad that you raised the issue of trust, because I think so much of this does come down to the question of trust, but also the point that you're raising around skills, right? Around capacity, not just amongst population, but also if digital public infrastructure is to create or to facilitate a broader community of innovators, we also need to have that capacity in place for that to happen, so that it doesn't result in the same kind of market capture that we've seen over the past decade. I think the risk, obviously, is that, I think is that we reproduce that same kind of techno-solutionism, and we must learn from that to ensure that we don't go down that route again. The Indian experience is pretty unique. I don't think it's the same experience in other parts of the country, in other parts of the world. What digital public infrastructure means, how it might play out, is likely to differ across other countries. So Ramiro, maybe bring you in here. What from your experience in Argentina do you feel is the link between these two? And do you have a different understanding of digital public infrastructure or some of the principles that Sharad and Shambhavi discussed?
No, first, I agree with the general overview of these topics. I think that we need to take a broader perspective on what is going on with digital technologies. I believe that we are going through like a second great transformation, right? The first one, we moved from rural areas to urban areas or cities, and now we are all moving to the digital space, to the world made of bits. And behind this revolution, there are, I believe, two main trends. One is the datafication of everything, things, humans, animals, whatever. And the second, this new decision-making behavior, based on the data, the algorithms, and so on. Now, when you look at this new system, you can see in agriculture, in manufacturing, in many sectors that we are going through a revolution. So thinking about SDGs and thinking about these technologies, you can link a lot of potential for achieving progress in sustainable development goals. I'm thinking about, for example, quality of education through e-learning, reducing poverty through data-driven policies, expanding the provision of health services, and so on. So in many of the SDGs issues, we know that technology can be a powerful source of change, of acceleration of progress. Now, one thing is the potential, and something totally different is the realization of that. Right? So I think that we have a lot of potential gains, but we have a lot to do in translating these potentials into actual policies, actual progress, right? And why is that? Why we have this gap, between these good use cases and stories and theories about technologies and SDGs, but then reality is so different? Well, in a way, it's a problem of development. It's too complex, but I will focus just on the very nature of this transformation, that is that, of course, the new technologies, new innovations are creating value and solving problems for those who can pay for these technologies. So if we are going to lead just profitable solutions to lead the way of technological transformation, we will have just transformation for those with firms with higher productivity, people with higher skills, citizens with louder voices and higher incomes. So what I see there is a problem in how to bring public policy into this discussion, a particular digital infrastructure in this discussion, as a way of correcting or shaping digital transformation, to incorporate those that are not reaping the benefits of these changes. So what I'm saying is that I believe that we need to think about the new social contract, along this idea of private-public partnerships, with the winners of this system. And from the policy point of view, it means not only to regulate existing technologies, but to set your priorities right first, and then to choose the technologies that you need, and to invest in those that you don't have. So sometimes we just reverse the discussion and say, okay, we have these two technologies, let's see what we can do with that. I think that we can do much more than that. And of course, for that, and I'm going to close with that, we need smart governments, credible governments, and governments with a lot of money. So that's something hard to find in the Global South.
Thanks, Ramiro. I think that's such an important point, right? That this conversation must be problem-led, not solution-led, and then trying to retrofit the problem into the available solutions. And I think the second big takeaway that I take from what you're saying is that we need to look at the distribution of the gains, of the technology gains, and not just assume that creating public infrastructure will automatically redistribute technology gains in an equitable fashion. Pencho, last but certainly not least, in your perspective, how do you see the link between public infrastructure, digital public infrastructure, and the SDGs? And maybe to pick up on where Ramiro left off, what are the kind of interventions or capacities that we might need to distribute these gains more equitably?
Many thanks. I'm representing the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, which is a political foundation closely associated with the Christian Democrats of the former Chancellor Merkel in Germany. Maybe some of you know we have published yesterday with our partners this paper on Global Climate Alliance that I'm recommending to all of you. I would like to recall the principle of this conference, which is one Earth, one family, one future. And I would like to remind all of you to the war that is going on currently, actually to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I believe the G20 has a role to play and must play a role to stop this invasion. I would like to raise a couple of issues that, in my opinion, or out from a European perspective, or the perspective of the European Union, play a big role when it comes to sustainability and digital infrastructure. We have to ask ourselves, is competition policy and digital policy incompatible? Discussing all this issue. Do we have collective action problem? And obviously we have market failure that we have to address. Every time we have to think what's a green product at the end of the day, and that's not an easy issue. We definitely need new data policy and new statutory standards in order to achieve more sustainable policy, and that's not an easy issue. So every time we have to ask, do we need a coordinated action? And we have to keep in mind the whole value chain. We have to address the issues of phase out of many products, and therefore we need information sharing. And in this area, I see a kind of conflict between the competition policy and data policy in general. By definition, sustainability means price increase. So we have to ask ourselves, what are we ready to pay? In the context of G20, I believe open data must play a bigger role. Our European experience is that we have learned some lessons, not only we in Europe, but also in Australia and elsewhere, Japan, when it comes to big tech regulation. We have some phenomenon like market tipping. We have done a couple of important cases in the last couple of years, just to mention the Amazon case, the Google Shopping, or the Android case. We are experiencing many dependencies in the digital sphere that are also affecting the issue of sustainability. I would like to reflect on some of the issues that Sharad mentioned, and of the third generation of public infrastructure. He said that we are experiencing some old problems with monopolies. I don't believe that we have solved the problems that we have with monopolies, and I don't believe that only Western democracies are affected. So keep in mind that we have a real problem when it comes to the big tech. The issue of colonization, I'll absolutely agree, and I absolutely agree that India give us good insights where to go and how to continue. I really appreciate your experiences. However, I think we don't have common ground when it comes to the principle of privacy. And I think we must work on those issues. The principles that you have revoked absolutely agree. We need more APIs, and definitely the G20 has a role to play when it comes to achieving more common ground in this area. But if we have more commitments on open APIs, then let's have also commitment on more open data. Finally, at the end of the day, in order to achieve the SDGs, we need evidence-based policy. And for those purposes, we need more proactive action, we need more open data and more transparency. It means more freedom of information. Those would be the couple of remarks that I would like to raise. Many thanks.
Thank you, Pencho. We have about 15 minutes left, and I'm going to come to the audience for Q&A in about 2 minutes. So please just keep your questions ready. Yeah, keep your questions ready. We'll come back to you in 2 minutes. Just a last round, one quick kind of speed round to the panelists, starting with you, Kalpana. What do you think the G20 should be doing with this regard to advance an agenda of safe and inclusive digital public infrastructure that can support sustainable development?
I think through the G20, we really need to look at a policy which is already we have aired on data privacy and data issues. Data access, especially in terms of agri and food nutrition in all the countries in the South, they are all systems which have been driven in the public sector. So you're sitting on huge data sets over the centuries, over the decades. Now these data are useful, but probably most of the data users are finding it difficult to use those data because they're inappropriate data sets. So developing appropriate data sets, data sharing, data access, and a platform which could be that's why I mentioned framework. This is a real problem which many of the innovators and entrepreneurs in this sector, when they come to us, are facing. They don't get good data or historic data which can be converted. And therefore, I think it's important and very pertinent to have a strong data policy. I know Niti Aayog is already, we are trying to do it, but we are still grappling with the challenges. So that's something which I would really air in this rapid round.
Great, thank you. And I know you have to leave us soon, so thank you so much for joining us and safe travels. Sharad, over to you. Quick soundbite.
See, G20, I'll take you back to 1991. It had become clear that mobile telephony worked at scale in Scandinavia. And by 1995, almost every country in the world decided they needed mobile telephony as public infrastructure. The choices then were, whether they do CDMA, GSM, TDMA. Today, what has happened is because of the India experiment of foundational digital infrastructure, many countries, at least 50 to our knowledge, have decided they have to replicate this model. They have choices. They can take the public infrastructure approach that India has taken. They can lean on Web3. They can lean on domestic tech. They can lean on big tech. There are 4 options that are there. If they go with this India model, then there is institution building that needs to happen in 3 areas. One is you need to create DPI, digital public infrastructure steward organizations. India has created one which is successful. Please check out mosip.io. 9 countries are using India's identity system, 350 million population. Last time I checked, 75 million were already in use. But if you go to mosip.io, there's a dashboard. It gets added by 1 million or so every day. So that is there. Second, it needs standards. We've already opened up our data standards called DEPA. You can look at them at depa.world. EU, for example, in Margaret Vestager's office is planning a pilot in several countries, including France and Denmark. So that is standards organizations, new generation standards organization are needed. And third, financing. And financing is a troublesome piece. Why? Because philanthropic capital is coming in to finance this. And as Amandeep Gill, who is the technical advisor to the UN Secretary General, the first technical advisor, points out that this has the potential to undermine what the revolution may take place. So we have to think about financing. Now the question that comes up is, as these 3 institutions take root in various countries, can G20 play a role in making that happen? And I think G20 is a perfect grouping to take this forward. And T20 is an ideal place for us to share this knowledge with the rest of the world so that they can not only take our insights, take our successes and failures, take our building blocks, and learn the institution building that is needed to bring it to life so that it can be a sustainable process for everybody as we go forward.
Great. Thank you, Sharad. Shambhavi, over to you. Policy priorities for G20 collaboration.
Okay, this is my child in a candy shop wish list. Okay, first is recognize that DPI is a means to the end. It's not the end by itself. And unless we agree to back the ends, DPI by itself is not going to do anything. Second, like Sharad pointed out, open standards and perhaps a first OSS pledge for all public infrastructure, create the minimal building blocks for anybody to use. And third is a digital literacy program, agree on some standards for a common digital literacy program so that the interoperability actually becomes a reality.
That sounds like a great candy store, one I'd want to visit. Ramiro, over to you.
Well, I will just contribute to the previous comments. I think that, of course, regarding technology transfer, regarding skills development, regarding global regulations, we need the G20. But particularly, I mean, these all are important, but this is a unique fora for peer learning and for a balanced discussion and for the Global South voices to be heard. So in this particular issue, I think that here we can make a difference. For example, in this topic that is new, that we are learning as we are experiencing in policies, such as digital infrastructure, we need to learn from each other. So I believe that the G20 in this sense is a unique fora for making progress on this.
That's great. I think just framing it as an opportunity for peer learning is a great way to think about it. Pencho, priorities for G20?
Yes, one Earth, one family, one future, stop the invasion, and then let's focus on substantial issues like sustainability, really. Yeah, as I said, we have a real problem with the monopolies in the world, with the digital monopolies. You don't need additional studies. We have enough experiences in many parts of the world. So please take the problems that we have with the big tech seriously, because it affects not only the economy, but the whole society. We're not talking that, that only small and medium enterprises are affected, but the whole society, the whole democratic process are affected. So therefore, we need really a common approach when it comes to gatekeeper regulation in the world. Maybe we can not dream of open by default when it comes to open data, but let's define at least some high-value data sets where we make no compromise. Public money, public code, and I think G20 has a role to play. Yeah, I believe the Indian presidency, we could use it for scaling up some of the good experiences that you have made it here. And especially I'm thinking of digital identities. So let's work on it.
Great, thank you. We have about 8 minutes left for questions. I'm going to take 3 questions and club them together. I see one hand there. Ma'am, you're next. And if someone wants to, I see a hand all the way at the back. So over to you. If you could just introduce yourself first and keep your questions brief, please. Yes, please come to the mic. There's a mic right behind you. And ma'am, there's one behind there near the camera.
Your Excellency, it is an honor and privilege for me to participate in this August gathering. I am Falguni Sundaram Biswal. I work as a young professional for India in international organization and member of Mediterranean Youth Task Force under FAO. So my question is, just think and answer it. What types of new opportunities bring digitalization to diverse sectors such as health, agriculture, education, trade, etc.? And how does digital can create new opportunities to overcome inequalities, promote sustainability, and create new pathways for empowering all members of society? I'm not talking about India, Germany, or other countries. I'm talking about G20s. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am, over to you.
Yes, I'm Ashima Goyal from IGIDR. My question is to Sharad. You know, we are talking about public infrastructure, digital public infrastructure as an answer to monopolization. But 2 questions. What is going to sustain energy and innovation? Because our history of public infrastructure or public organizations is that seems to decline over time. And the second is, what is going to prevent public monopoly, this fear of the big brother and that the government knows everything? So what are the guardrails that need to be in place? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I think, Rajat, you had a question. You can use the mic.
Thanks, Urvashi. My name is Rajat Kathuria. I'm from Shivnada University. I had a sort of conceptual question on monopolies as well. You know, the history of monopolies since the early part of last century shows us there's no monopoly which is benign. All monopolies are abusive. That's, I think, a given. I don't think there's a benign, whether it's market-driven or whether it's by license given by the government, they all end up being very, very abusive. But the kind of framing of the vocabulary in digital monopoly seems to be that a transgression has already been committed. So when a digital monopoly buys out, and there's conglomerization in what the Digital Markets Act in Europe calls it, but this vocabulary is a little troubling. When a digital firm acquires something, you call it a transgression. So I feel it's already pre-decided. And therefore, I think the ex post, it should be left. I wanted to get your views, the panel's views on this. Where is this term coming from? Understood that they are abusive, but aren't we pre-deciding something that has not yet been committed?
Thanks, Rajat. No small question there. We have time for one last question. Ma'am, over to you.
So thank you, Anatoni from Brazil. Some countries, in my own country in Brazil, we have seen the damage that some fake news can invade politics and democracy. So I wonder what would be your recommendations for G20 to ensure that fake news and democracies, fake news will be somehow damped so that democracy can prevail. Thank you.
Big, complex questions for all of you. I don't envy your being a panelist. Ramiro, do you want to take the first one?
Yes, I think that digital technologies are what we call general purpose technologies. So the potential for changing products and processes in the private sector is huge. You can see these new technologies in every sector in the economy. So I believe that the potential is really huge. Now, regarding inequality trends, I think that the outcome is uncertain, but it's not predetermined. It's policy intensive, right? So you can have a lot of discussions on inequality in algorithms, but also you can find a lot of examples of more equality thanks to this new decision making. So I think that in a way it's not that algorithms are like a natural thing, but they're a social construct. So it's about how to build this, right? So it's up to us in a way.
Thanks, Ramiro. Sharad, I think you have a round of applause.
I'll take two questions, one that you asked and the one about antitrust, which Rajat asked. See, we know antitrust has not worked. But, monopolization is a recurrent phenomena. You got to upgrade your thinking about it. And Ms. Lina Khan, a 31-year-old who was appointed as a chair of FTC, and Margaret Vestager in Europe are reimagining this. And this is happening in two dimensions. One is that you define harms differently than were defined, when you're dealing with physical infrastructure. And that is now well understood. And the second one, which we don't have time to go into detail, is the one that I'm bringing out, is the notion of techno-legal regulation, that if we have to regulate individuals, we got to bring both public tech and public policy to act together. So that there is a revolution. I define that revolution like, physics went from Newtonian physics to Einstein physics. It's a similar revolution that is taking place in how to regulate potential monopoly is much better. The second question which you asked is, I think, very, very important, because we have to navigate in digital infrastructure two dangerous things. One, authoritarianism, government getting too much of power, and we have seen previously issues that have come up in various countries, and Europe is particularly sensitive to that. At the same time, we also have the big tech problem, where companies become very powerful. And the victim in both of these cases is the agency of the citizen, right? And so we have to design digital infrastructure in such a way that it doesn't fall on either of the two sides, right? To avoid big tech, we become pro-government, and now we have authoritarianism that has come in. Or we start with the government, and we don't want dependence of the government, and we end up in the hands of big tech. So navigating this middle path is absolutely critical. And so therefore, to do that well, and to replicate the India experience, it becomes essential that we are crystal clear about the insights that have come and the principles that underline. And I must say the Indian system has played a seminal role, and I'll end with this. I want to point out that one of the first places where privacy, data privacy, is a fundamental right, came about in India when the Supreme Court judgment, 9-0 judgment. And as many of you know, in India, once something is declared as a privacy right, law cannot override it because it's considered to be a fabric of the Constitution. Now, the law that is coming to operationalize this cannot violate, because if it does violate, many of you will go to the Supreme Court and that will be challenged. So India has the most robust framework that has been established with respect to data. It has been operationalized at a scale that we haven't seen in any other part of the world. In September 2021 to today, we have 1.1 billion bank accounts connected. Our consent system is growing rapidly at 52% month on month. More data transfer is happening than ever before. We are already bigger than the European system by any yardstick that you imagine. Yes, it is not known and understood by the rest of the world. But I think today that represents the gold standard for how to deal with personal data. And we must therefore share our thinking with the rest of the world so that there is knowledge, understanding, and replication, because India, for the reason that you mentioned, has this long tradition. Anything good we have, we are happy to give it away, because for us, the world is our family. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharad. Pencho, you want to come in on?
That was a good finish with one family, but I have to make some remarks. I have a kind of different definition when it comes to public infrastructure, but I adhere to the Indian definition because I really appreciate your presidency and we have to accept it the way you interpret public infrastructure. I don't believe that public infrastructure is going to prevent monopolies, because despite your successful infrastructure, you still have the problems with the big tech, you still have the problems with Amazon store, you have the problems with the app stores, you have the problem with social media, as we have. When it comes to fake news, Brazil, it's not only Brazil. Thinking of USA, Cambridge Analytica, think of the Balkans and many, many other areas in the world. The answer that we have, there are two basically landmark legislation currently in the world. The first one, Digital Services Act in Europe, and Online Services Security Bill in the UK. And the answer is content moderation, just shortly. And that's not a perfect law. What matters is the enforcement, and we're going to see how we are going to enforce it in the future. But still, we have some major work done in the past, and you can simply replicate it in the framework of the G20. That would be my last remark. And
thanks, Pencho. Shambhavi, last words are yours.
Thanks. So I think just on the first question, application-wise, I think there's a lot to be done where there are multiple stakeholders. So health, I think the first example that comes to my head is, till now we have kind of partitioned health and healthcare applications, but digital public infrastructure gives us to put that all under one bucket and look at a person from birth to death, rather than saying that, okay, nutrition is important now, healthcare is going to be important now. And just on the fake news thing, I think moderation is extremely difficult. I come from the health sciences, so I'm sorry, I don't really understand IT and tech so well. But I think fake news moderation is going to be extremely difficult, because balancing that with freedom of expression is going to be a continual problem, which is why I think, again, digital literacy programs, which help people navigate life on the internet, is going to be very critical for democracies to serve.
Great, thank you. We're out of time, so I'm not going to try and summarize this discussion, but maybe one big takeaway that we can agree on is that there is an opportunity here for peer learning, that we all need to work together and figure out what those opportunities are, what those challenges are, and come up with common, sustainable, inclusive governance frameworks. So thank you all for listening and for your questions, and I hope we can continue this conversation over the next year. Thank you.